Okay, well, howdy. Happy Texas A&M howdy to everyone who took the time this afternoon to join us for this webinar. Just to make sure everybody is in the right webinar, we're going to talk about college admissions at Texas A&M this afternoon. A couple of housekeeping notes. I think most folks are probably over aware of how webinars work. Please use the Q&A box if you have questions. We're going to try to answer questions as we go. If they're really specific, very student-specific questions, we may not be able to answer them, but as best as we can, we'll make sure we address any of the questions that have broad implications. We are recording today's webinar, so we will share that recording to everyone in the follow-up note, as well as the presentation itself and our brand new Texas A&M guide to college admissions. So again, welcome, howdy, and thanks for joining us. In terms of a little bit about who we are, I'm Bob Carlton. Joining us today is Lisa Bain Carlton and Claudia Gonzalez Salinas. Claudia is in Houston. Lisa is the founder of College Matchpoint, and we're both based in Central Texas. Not that it's the most important thing, but Lisa and I are both ags. And so it's fun to talk about a school that we both went to, but even more importantly, that so many of the students that we work with have applied to themselves. We've been working with A&M students for the last 15 years. Not surprising, I suspect the majority of them were not auto-admit students, and many of them have applied to business or engineering or other competitive majors. And we are so proud when we get to talk to students who are thriving in Aggie land. I think everybody, if you're on this webinar, has a great sense of what makes A&M so distinctive. But as college nerds, Claudia, Lisa, and I are all college nerds, there are things that really stand out to us. You probably know it's the second largest university in the country. Aggies don't like being second in anything. And so I'm sure they'd love to be as big as Arizona State. They are the university or college in the United States that has the most CEOs. And not that rankings are the most important thing in any part of the college process, but they are generally recognized as a public university that has a great ROI, that is affordable and superior. Students love A&M. 94% of freshmen come back for their sophomore year. And then finally, A&M is and has always been a research university, and they were the first college in the United States to pass $1 billion in research grants. Now, a little bit about the results from this year, because I think that'll give context to all the students and parents that are joining us today about just how competitive the road to Aggieland has become, partially because the school, the secret is out. It's become so darn popular, not just in the state of Texas, but increasingly across the country and internationally. Last year, A&M had the most undergraduate applications in their history. And as a group, we fully expect for that to be even higher this year. Okay, A&M is one of those schools that during the pandemic, as they went test optional, they saw an influx of students applying to A&M. Now, there are so many things that are distinctive about the admissions process at A&M. One of them is in contrast to what A&M would say is that little school down the road in Austin. And that is the auto-admit process at A&M is radically different from UT Austin. It's top 10%, not top 6, and only 43% of their incoming class last year were in the top 10%. As a frame of reference, traditionally UT would say 75% of their incoming class is in the top 6%. Now, a large portion of the remainder, 41% of last year's class, were holistic, but you'll note we sort of use asterisks or air quotes to tell you that holistic is a little bit different at A&M. They tend to really focus on academics. Letters of recommendation are optional. And so it's a thing to understand. Lisa, do you want to talk a bit more at a high level about that holistic before a little later you go deeper into the components of holistic?
Well, maybe just to define holistic, that holistic means that a university is looking at all parts of your application. So they're looking at your academics, both your grades, but also the rigor. They're looking at your test scores if you send them. They're looking at your extracurricular activities. So they're taking you're looking at your essays, they're looking at your resume, they're taking everything into account. And when I kind of take it apart in a few minutes, I'll explain to you a little more about how A&M does that and maybe how that differs from some other schools.
Great, thanks. And then another distinctive of A&M is that they've really done a phenomenal job of articulating alternative pathways. Last year, 16% of the incoming freshman class at A&M came through what A&M refers to as alternative pathways. Students that are hoping to be Aggies are typically familiar with some of the options at Glenn Community College, where you're afforded an opportunity to pretty much be a full ag, but then you have some GPA guidelines to hit. Gateway is a relatively new program where they basically say, come in the summer, have great grades, and if your grades are great, you can stay. These are wonderful programs for students to consider if unfortunately they aren't admitted in their initial application. And then the last thing is, one of the things that is unique about A&M is that they have spent the last decade executing on a plan to diversify their student base. 20% of their incoming class is first-generation students, and they are public in saying they'd like to get that to 25% as quickly as humanly possible. Now, there are a bunch of new majors at A&M each year. They've done a phenomenal job of really trying to respond to the student base by offering alternative majors and new majors. I won't read the slide to you. I will comment that we see a lot of students interested in psychology, either from the social sciences side or the neuroscience side. And for students who are interested in the neuroscience side, they actually offer 3 specific tracks in different colleges at A&M that allow you to pursue a degree in neuroscience. Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about the review process?
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody. We're so glad to have you and thrilled that you're here to join us today. So I'll talk a little bit about the holistic review. So when we think about A&Ms, and I am going to compare it a little bit to UT because I think it'll be helpful for you to kind of understand a little bit of the differences. A&M is more focused on the numerical side of your profile. So for those of you who are younger students, this is a real push to get those good grades, take those rigorous courses. So they're going to be looking at both your grades and the rigor. In other words, did you take that class AP? What level did you take the course, or IB if you have that option at your school? So really the big enchilada in the middle that I always say to students is you can't run from your grades. So grades are absolutely at the middle of this. Test scores, we have seen that A&M was genuinely test optional. We had quite a lot of students get in test optional last year. And so I think the decision, we'll talk a little later about, if you want to send your test scores or not, but that is going to be a part of that academic read if you do share your test scores, right? And then in addition, you have the other parts of your application, which we think of in a holistic read. And I think where A&M is at with this kind of middle group of students that kind of are on the line, right? So they weren't in that top 10%. They used to have just a couple years back, the top 25%, and all of those were admitted if you had a certain test score. So if for students on the line, I think that the bottom part of this graph does come into play. Your resume, especially things that relate to the major that you're stating that you want to pursue. And then your essays, I think also do come into play. I don't think they come into play near as big as at UT, which is why some people say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I didn't get into A&M, but I got into UT. They're really evaluating in two different ways. So it is important to know that your major matters. So, some majors are more competitive, and we'll talk about that. So choosing a major that you are well aligned to, that you actually have a background in, not just at A&M or at UT, but at all colleges, is going to really help you. And it's going to help you here too. And we'll talk a little bit because, I think most students, when they think of majors, they think about business, engineering, computer science, nursing, and maybe communications, when there's so many options. And I had so much fun as we were making this presentation, like looking at all the cool majors. Like Bob said, 3 offerings for neuroscience. I mean, if you're interested in the environment, I lost count of how many environmental majors they had. So, there's really a lot of depth here, but you're gonna wanna try to have some background in that. And then A&M is considering demonstrated interest. Claudia will talk about that a little bit later. Demonstrated interest is where you're showing the college that it's like showing them a little love, like that you actually are really genuinely interested in them, that you're not just wanting to attend, you didn't just throw an application out, but you're actually genuinely interested. So when you put all of this together, this is how A&M is looking at the students. And so what they do is they take that top 10% and they get a yes real fast, okay? Because they're automatically admitted. Other students, what we notice is if you're like say in the 10% to 20% range, you often will hear pretty quickly too. But a significant number of students will sort of stay in what I would call purgatory for a while. And A&M even says that they go back and look a few times at those applicants. And one of the things they're looking at is interest for sure. So that's important to know. But the biggest place you can make an impact on getting a yes from A&M is in those grades. That's really like very, very important.
Lisa, one question that's come up quickly. Is there a difference in the relative importance of the personal statement essay at A&M versus the shorter supplements that A&M requires?
So A&M is going to be looking at the personal statement. And then what we don't know yet for this year, because they're making some changes, which Claudia is going to talk about, we're not positive what shorter questions they're going to have. We should know those any day. The rumor on the street is that they're going to do away with the diversity question and they're going to use the 2 shorter answers. Claudia, you want to add anything?
I do want to add, so like in the holistic review process, and just to share a little bit about my own background, prior to joining College Matchpoint, I spent a long time on the admissions side of the house, reading and evaluating applications. So when it comes to holistic review, especially as you're looking at more competitive majors, so I saw that people are asking, how competitive is engineering? How competitive is business? The essays and the short answers become more important because it becomes telling in terms of what that student can contribute to the overall community. So the job of an admissions office, which is hard for, I think, most families to understand because you're so focused on your own individual student, is that the job of admissions is to build a community. So the essays can be very revealing in helping admissions understand what students are contributing to that specific community.
Fantastic. Thanks, Claudia. And someone's asked a question here, and I'm going to answer it right now. And Claudia, jump in if you want to add anything, or Bob. Is what's the average GPA? I know that families get really excited about average GPAs, but the truth of the matter is that colleges do a lot of recalculating GPAs. So really what you're thinking of, I'm going to give it to you maybe a different way. You definitely should have more A's than B's if you're thinking that you're competitive for A&M, and you definitely need rigor in your coursework, okay? So if I was to ballpark it, I would say it's somewhere between 65 and 75% A's, somewhere in there. It's a strong pool of candidates at A&M. So that's a better way to look at it in terms of colleges, because they all recalculate the GPA kinds of things. So and they vary so much from school to school. You want to add anything to that, Claudia?
Yeah, so when admissions is reviewing your application, it is in context of what is available to your high school. So you're not going to be disadvantaged if you're at a high school that, for instance, doesn't even offer APs or IB curriculums. So they want to make sure that you're pushing yourself within your homeschool environment. And so that's what they're going to be looking for. So if you're at a school that only offers a few APs, that you're pushing yourself up into those and really challenging yourself and having success in those classes. Okay, that's the other key part that sometimes people forget. But also that, like, if it's good to push yourself, but you don't want to be overmatched. Like, you don't want it to hurt you in terms of, like, you want to learn, but you don't want to, like, then get a C in that class, because that can show growth, but that could also not help your application. So colleges and universities, and especially A&M, are going to be looking closely at what your high school is offering and what you can do within that curriculum.
Thank you. All right. I think many of you know, and is I think one of the things that is always kind of concerning to people is that A&M is rolling admissions. So the application opens on August the 1st. Now, the key to A&M is early is better. However, sloppy is not better, okay? So you're not going to, it's very likely, it's looking like we're not going to know what the supplemental questions are until August 1st, I think is what we should all expect at this point. You want to spend time to do those well. You don't need a month to do that, but you're going to need a little time, depending on how many of them they give us. I'm guessing it's going to be 2. It's especially important for the business school because they have a very small population, okay? But overall, it is really good to get your A&M application in early, okay? So if I was to give you a date, I would say that you want to have your A&M application in August, probably a little more, not August 1st, because you're not going to send your best application, and the applications are buggy at that point. Like, they don't have all the kinks worked out of the applications. But I would say mid-August is probably what you should be shooting for, and that's going to help you. A&M does keep track of, a lot of kids will wait till October, November. It does help you to go on and submit in August, but there is, I think, a little bit too much tension on August 1st, August 2nd, August 3rd. Almost no way you're going to have a really great application at that point. So just kind of weigh those two things together and aim to do your best application, to know that if you're A&M or bust, then you need to have some time set aside at the beginning of August so that you can get that best application in.
I would also add that it's great to get your application in. Having read so many applications in my career, you want a fresh reader. And I can tell you that at the beginning of the season, I'm way nicer, I'm friendlier, the world is wonderful, the sun is shining. And by the time I read number 1000, I need a new prescription to my glasses. I am not warm and fuzzy anymore. So those kinds of things also play a factor. And I think that sometimes families don't know that. So I'm here to tell you, early is better. Take the time.
All right, let's talk a little bit about testing, because I think that's always on people's mind. Now, I know everyone's going to say, should I send this score? Should I send that score? You really need to look at kind of the middle 50% of A&M. You need to take into account that a lot of people are not submitting scores, and then determine if you should send your scores or not. I don't see students at a disadvantage who aren't submitting their scores. So I would definitely think about this decision. I would not, I probably, upper 20s is where I would start potentially sending. Depends on the major. And remember that if you're going for like business or engineering, make sure you've got a good, strong math score if you're sending that score, because that is important and they will look at that. While A&M's final deadline is December 1st, you have until December 15th to get any test scores in. So if you do get new scores, like if you sent scores, but then you happen to get new fresh scores that are better, definitely submit those up until December 15th. So you can definitely do that and they'll be happy to take those. Anything you want to add, Claudia, to tests?
I think with testing, I often get the question that whether or not, how many times to take the test before I kind of quit on it. One, I think you should study for the test. If you feel like, don't go in cold and expect a great score, because that will be probably in the minority of students who hit their best score on the first shot. I do encourage students to study, but if you're unable to do that, at least getting some practice in, go to Khan Academy. That's a great resource. It's free. You can get some work under there. Submitting your scores is a whole other piece that I think you're about to address, Lisa, based on what the requirements are here for Texas A&M.
Right. And what I would say is, be careful here and make sure you have a good, strong score if you're going to submit it. Because sometimes I think students are like, oh, I'll just send it. And I think that can sometimes put you at a disadvantage for sure. Okay, so let's talk about majors. A&M is a major focused school. As I would say, our Texas public schools, both UT and A&M, have become major focused schools. You cannot apply to A&M undecided, okay? They're not set up for undecided. So you really do want to choose a major, okay? They have so many phenomenal majors, and I'm going to show you a few of them in a minute, but your student is going to have a major. I will say that one thing that I really love about A&M is that it isn't terribly hard, other than maybe engineering and business and nursing and architecture. Those four are hard to switch around in, like to move into, but otherwise in their other 130 majors that they have, you can move around pretty easily. So, I wouldn't over stress on that, but you are going to need to have a major. I'm going to start with engineering because it is a huge part of A&M. It's 30% of the student body. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of students choose A&M. So there's a few things I want you to understand because it's a little different than a lot of colleges. At A&M, you are admitted into general engineering. This is true if you apply computer science as well. So you're not guaranteed that you're going to get into mechanical or biomedical or whatever it is you want. You have initial courses that you have to complete, and then after that, you do that and you get a certain GPA, then you get into your chosen field. Okay. So that's really important to understand when you're applying to A&M as an engineering student. Many schools, you'll apply directly into mechanical engineering or electrical engineering or whatever, but it is important for you to know that. Okay. Engineering is the only major at A&M that has an early action deadline. And what early action means is that if you submit your application by this date, they will try to let you know in December that whether you got in or not. That doesn't always happen, I'm just going to tell you, but it'll help your chances of that. And of course, we already talked about you guys are going to be ready and you're going to be submitting in August. So October is no problem. Engineering applicants do have to complete an engineering supplement. Now, the purpose of this supplement is to explain to the person reading your application why you want to be an engineer and hopefully some background that you have in engineering, whether it's you've taken extra courses at school and you've done the engineering track, or you did an engineering summer program, or you did some shadowing with engineers, whatever it is that you have experience around engineering. That's the purpose of those 300 words, is to explain that. And of course, I'm sure most of you are going to be applying to many colleges, and you're going to have to do that multiple times. But it is the only major at A&M where you actually have to tell them why I want this major. I think this can be a real advantage to you and an opportunity if you use this wisely, okay? So you actually take some time to really think about what it is you've done and why you're interested in it. I would skip I like to play with Legos, okay? Because that's the most common answer there is. So go dig a little deeper for me here. So you might have started out liking Legos, and it is true that many engineers did like Legos, but go a little beyond that, because it's so common that you might get that admission person's eye roll a little bit with that. Claudia, you want to add anything there?
Yeah, you're just not going to get an eye roll. You're going to get a forehead slap. Like, people are like so done with the Lego essay. I've read engineering applications for probably 15 of my 20 years that I was in highly selective admissions. And they're really trying to just understand like why you like engineering. Like, because so many high schools don't offer engineering courses, they're like, how are you following this curiosity? How are you exploring this? And so there's got to be something beyond the Legos. So think of what has taken you down this pathway and why, and that can really help you in this essay.
Okay, a few majors where they're really popular majors, so there's limited space, so you should know that, and they're each a little different. The Mays School of Business just isn't very big, okay? So they just don't have a whole lot of seats. So that's why, and it's a great business school. Bob and I happen to go to it. So, so one of the things is that if you have your heart set on Mays, you definitely want to get that in August. That will help you. College of Nursing is a pre-nursing that you go into, and then you ultimately going into nursing. Again, that's 20 spots. So very, very small. Architecture is also very limited space. So just as you're thinking about majors, we just want you to have as much information as you possibly can on, which ones. I mean, actually engineering at A&M, the good thing is engineering is one of the last things to fill because they've got so many slots. So it's actually an opportunity for engineers that isn't maybe available at some other schools, that you're really going to have a whole lot of slots available. So from that standpoint, that's a plus. Now, I put on here just some interesting majors because I want to always help students and families expand their thoughts about what majors their students could choose. For example, A&M has a visualization major, which is like a animation for movies, which is one of the largest. Pixar hires a ton of people out of here. You wouldn't expect that at A&M. They have landscape architecture. They have meteorology. Meteorology is a pretty small department as well. They just added women and gender studies. They have telecommunications, media studies, public health, sports management. So a lot of, it's kind of overwhelming, the amount of majors. So, and they have a new thing on their website that I hadn't noticed until we were preparing for this, which helps you pick your major. So I would use those resources. We find that some of those college resources on helping you look at majors can be very, very helpful. So I definitely would spend some time on the majors. And then of course, Bob at the beginning shared those brand new majors that are available as well. So you've got a wealth of opportunity here to choose from. So I encourage you, I feel like having spent years sitting with students as they're completing their applications, I know how sometimes it's like, well, it could be this or this. Spend some time. And this is someplace I encourage parents to, really sit down with your student and spend some time thinking about this. And I'll challenge you to consider looking outside of the top 5 majors, because everybody else is looking at the top 5 majors. So if that's of interest to your student, if your student is genuinely interested in one of those top 5, then that's great. But I think that there's so much more out there and available to students that they often don't take advantage of. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised as you kind of dig into the A&M website to see how much is available there. It's kind of exciting.
One comment I want to make, for the parents of students on this webinar who are gamers, who love playing video games, visualization is a one-of-a-kind major nationally. It is a sensational major for that intersection of graphic design, technology, and engineering. As Lisa said, the competition for those graduates at Pixar and other animation houses is incredible. It's possibly one of the most surprising things about A&M, because you wouldn't think that they would be the largest generator of Pixar employees.
Excellent. Honors. So I was just responding to a question here. So in terms of the honors programs, this is sort of a really great opportunity for those students who just want to have a little bit of extra engagement in their process. And what I mean by that, it's like, this is a student who likes to engage in discussion. They want to do a special project. They want to be able to have that connection perhaps with faculty or in research. And so that tends to be the students that honors programs are really kind of dialed into. So it's really easy to apply for the honors program at A&M, because for the university honors, which serves the entire university, all you have to do is check a box, and then they will send you an email or something through your portal to say, submit the rest of the things that we want for this part of your application. So it's really pretty easy in that respect. And then you just kind of follow the steps once you receive that communication back from the university. So one of the things that I learned about the honors program that's very interesting about A&M, that is very different from other places, is that they really want you to also apply for honors housing community. So that helps those honor students engage with one another and create sort of a lifestyle and community within this larger community. So we find that a lot of students who are interested in this piece like this as a little extra tidbit for their A&M experience, and it really resonates with them well. Now, if you don't get into the honors program in that first run, you can apply later once you are an enrolled student, but there are some GPA minimums and other criterias that you have to maintain as a student at the university.
Claudia, is your overall admissions to Texas A&M University impacted if you don't get into the honors program?
Not at all. So like the honors piece is sort of like that extra boost, that extra bump to your education. It's sort of like your little, you know, I like to say like, it's like the icing on the cake. If you haven't been in other webinars with us, there's a lot of food analogies with me because I'm very food centric, but it's that extra icing if you like icing, and I certainly do. So it's a really great experience overall for all students, but for those who want that extra icing, you can have it. Okay. Business honors. Now, business honors is a little bit different. It's definitely a hybrid program where you're both part of an honors program and is also sort of an academic major on this campus. I think what's really interesting about this program is that it's definitely competitive. So that's one thing to kind of keep in mind. So what they're really looking for in the competitiveness, because that's really where most of our questions come, is like, how do I get in? Well, here's the secret, because there is no secret to this sauce. But what you need to know is that they're really looking for your high-end students. It says here 25% ranked because that's what they advertise. Honestly, that's really closer to being ranked the top 4 to 5% of your class. Because again, the business school is small already by design. The honors program is that much smaller. Okay, so they're really looking for students who are really excelling in their academic coursework. So that means that you've got to have that rigor behind you as well. The other piece to this is that the testing is optional at the moment. So that's something to keep in mind. But historically, the place for this has been a 1470 plus on the SAT. So they're looking for some strong testers in this program as well. And if you have scores that are exceeding that point, then it might be a good idea for you to submit them. Usually the notification for this program will come out later and after your initial acceptance into the university. But the fun fact for today is for those who like the super extra icing is, or you like ice cream on the side a la mode with your cake, is that you can actually apply to both business honors and university honors and be enrolled in both programs simultaneously. So if you're really looking for those extra bumps, you can really have that as part of your experience at Texas A&M.
And I would add, we have had quite a few students get into business honors over the years. I do think the other thing that they're really looking at, because we have had some kids who were, you know, probably more closer to the 25 than the 4, right? They're really looking for students. It's a very discussion-based, interactive kind of community. And it's only 60 students, so it's small. And so what they're really also looking for is like, how have you demonstrated that you would be a good member of this community? So students who are very active, who, you know, in their recommendations, the teacher is going to say, oh yeah, they, you know, how they contributed to class. All of that is very, very important to the business honors. So, and there are students, just to even mix things up a little more, you could apply to business honors and have that be your first major and have a second major that is not business. So you don't have to have another business major, and there are students who do that. So it's really interesting. If you're interested in it, I would recommend that they have like information sessions and things like that, that you kind of dig into it, because it is a really cool program. Now, someone asked a question that I think is worth answering about at UT. One of the things that happens with honors is that it kind of gets you 2 different looks, and can kind of be a bump. The honors programs at A&M don't work that way, because they're going to send it to you after, whereas UT does it simultaneously. So you would not get that help sometimes if like the honors person reads it and then they like you, but the admissions person didn't. It doesn't have that same play at A&M.
Okay, jumping into the essays. So as we're looking at the essays, we really are looking for ways to be distinct, as it says on the slide, but more importantly, this is a way to add dimension to your application. Okay, so remember I talked about that the job of the admissions person is to build a community. And so you're going to need a lot of different pieces to build that community. So when it comes to the essay itself, I think this is an opportunity for you to really start honing in on the areas that have not already been represented on the application. Okay, so if you've already are highlighting an activity on your activity sheet, if you're already looking at a couple of classes, think about the things that are not being said in the application. You know, there are plenty of wonderful growing experiences and things that happen. So I know that this was a question that was asked in the Q&A, was like, well, what makes it distinctive? You don't want the admissions person rolling their eyes or given a forehead slap when they read yet another Lego essay, right? So like, what makes you different? It's like telling that extra story. So what I have found over time is, one, you got to be genuine with yourself. I think it's really important for you to be able to talk about what makes you special. Okay. And I know that's really hard for like teenagers to think about, because you're not actively engaged with this reflective process. You got to be honest with yourself and really look at your experiences. What has made you be a little bit different? Like, what changed your perspective in life? What changed sort of how you conduct yourself? Those kinds of things make a big difference. The question I received in the Q&A was specific to like, what about the sports injury essay? Or what about focusing on some of these other aspects that may be related to athletics? And I think athletics is okay to talk about. You know, admissions people are going to come in like, okay, hold on, they're talking about athletics. What is going to be new? There has to be something more than just like, oh, athletics, I broke my leg, or I tore my ACL, and now I can't like compete in my sport, but I got better and then I won the race. Like, that is not growth. That is like just a reporting of facts. What would be deeper is if you gain some new perspective during that time. Did you try something different because you couldn't return to your sport and you really learned you loved this other thing? So it's a process of that discovery that needs to be shared in the essay, and that helps you to stand out quite a bit more. What doesn't work, or like what families think we want to hear in admissions, they think we want to hear tragedy. So it breaks my heart when a kid's like, but my grandma didn't die, so I don't have anything to talk about. Don't wish for your grandma to die. Don't do that. That's not okay. But you don't have to talk about tragedy. There's so much more that you can talk about in your responses for your essays, as well as don't force comedy. If you're not a funny person, that's okay. You have other things that you can share, and that things that can be interesting. So I've always found that it's the funny observations about life. I had a student who was just remarking on their own job at, being one of those sign spinners that stands outside stores during the holiday season, and sort of like how people interacted with them. And they learned a lot about themselves, because they're like, this is really weird to be so out there and yet so ignored. And what a great perspective that was to be shared, and how they treat people changed. It could be cultural things, like if it's something you want to share, like, what is it like to make tamales at home, because culturally that's something that's important to me, like sharing that experience and how that could be added value. So we all have something there, and sometimes it's the surprise growth moments that have like the best stories. But if you're not being reflective and thinking about how you got to where you are, then you're losing the story that could be told.
And I would add that one of the things we often see is that especially parents, because, really truthfully, I was having this conversation with a parent the other day. As a parent who sent 2 kids to college, none of us think our kids' college essay is good enough. We don't, because we look at it as a 50-year-old, whatever it is that we do, or 40-year-old, and we're like, oh, wait, it should have this, and it should be more formal. This is supposed to be from a 17-year-old, okay? That doesn't mean it should be horribly grammatically incorrect, but it's supposed to be from a 17-year-old. And it is not a neon replay of the student's resume, which is the number one thing that I hear from parents is, but wait, they didn't talk about this and they didn't talk about that. Remember that this is one piece of a whole story. The application is the whole story, and this is a piece that's supposed to let us get to know. It's as though I didn't know Claudia. And so if I read Claudia's essay, would I read something that would tell me something about her that I didn't know, right? And so it's not so necessary. Now, you certainly can play off of something that's on there, on your resume, because you're telling us more about you in that. But I think it's really important. You don't want 650 words of just thing after thing after thing that you've done. That's called a resume, not a personal statement. So be careful there. And like Claudia said, I think taking time to reflect, how am I different because of this? What changed in me because of this? Where did that take me? Where is that going to take me in college? Those things are critically important to a good essay.
I want to jump in and make one other comment. In our work coaching students on these personal statements, what we always say to students is, you're going to spend a lot more time brainstorming than you're expecting. What you're used to with a school assignment, which is, I'm just going to sit down and hammer out that first draft. Then I might do a second draft, but I really am on deadline and I just want to submit. That's the opposite of what's going on here. We always encourage students, go deeper, be more specific. Write about something that's distinctive to you. If you have the chance to walk on an elevator with the admissions officer at A&M at the bottom of the bell tower, and you had 13 floors to describe to them what makes you distinctive, you wouldn't pull out your resume and give them color commentary on your resume. you talk about something that's uniquely you. And so when a student or a parent says, what is a distinctive essay? The first answer is the student, who she is, or what he's done, or what they've been all about.
All right, here's the next piece of the puzzle that I think students really struggle with, and that is answering these short answer supplemental questions. So when it comes to these questions, I think that number one, let's note that these might change for A&M in this coming year because they have not been released. But last year, they were covering things that were talking about that added value that you could potentially have to the community. So last year, the short answers focused on who is this key person in your life and what was their influence and how does that kind of shape you? They were looking at what's your life event that was signaling success. So there was a question on diversity. And I think a lot of times students can be very narrow about diversity and they just think, oh, well, you know, like I'm just thinking about ethnic or religious diversity. This question is so much bigger than that. Like you might be diverse because you're the only kid who eats peanut butter and like mayonnaise sandwiches, and that could be your diversity in what you're adding. I don't recommend that. I don't think that's a good flavor combo, but that's a side note. So it's really about sort of using the short answers to highlight other pieces of yourself in this particular process. So that's the big takeaway there with the short answer questions. Okay. The application and the application information system. Okay, so that AIS, that's your portal into Aggie land once you've applied. Okay, so one is we are hoping that Common Application becomes a thing for Texas A&M. And the reason is because they've announced that they're going to partner. So that should go live August 1st, but you never know until August 1st comes around whether or not that happens. So if you're not using the Common App, then you're using Apply Texas to apply to Texas A&M. Okay, so those are your two application platforms that you will have as an option. So do whatever's more comfortable for you. We're excited about the potential of Common Application because so many of our students use the Common Application for other schools, and that really helps to reduce the workload for them. So that's something that you will need to keep checking on to make sure that the Texas A&M will move in that pathway. Okay, so you've done. Go ahead.
This always, people ask us this, is there a better application? No, your application is the application that works for you. Admissions officers are going to treat you the same no matter which platform you're on. We've seen that, you know, A&M already had another platform, which was Coalition. So it's being interchanged with Common App. We saw no difference in the kids on Coalition versus the kids on Apply Texas. And because I've been doing this for 15 years in Texas, Apply Texas is the worst piece of technology out there. So if I were you, I would try to avoid it, or I would hit save 1,000 times. So that's, I know, just a question that's always on people's minds. And of course, well, from what we understand with the Common App, one thing that is super helpful is that this will allow our students to apply to almost all their colleges on Common App, which will be fantastic because UT is also slated to go on Common App.
Yeah.
One other question here, Lisa. Historically, has there been any impact when public universities like A&M go on the Common App?
I'm going to let Claudia answer that since she's from the admissions world.
Yeah, so usually the trend is that a lot of schools like the Common Application, and when they move to it, the reason why they like it is because they do experience a rise in applications. So, and usually that trend will last a few years as people learn that they are now part of the Common Application. So that means there's actually probably going to be more people applying to Texas A&M than ever before, because it's now easier to apply because they're part of Common Application. Common Application itself has something like 900 member institutions that are a part of it, both based domestically and internationally. And the only difference you have to do is kind of check a couple boxes and do separate payment fees. Then that really facilitates the ease of applying. So I would anticipate that this will possibly make A&M a little bit more selective than what it has been in the past. So again, going back to that prior point, it's going to be ever more important to get your stuff in early and get a fresh reader. Okay. Now, once that application is submitted, it's important that you regularly check your portal. And the reason is because, as Lisa had alluded to before, that demonstrated interest is a real thing. So you got to show that college love, and the way A&M tracks it is actually by how often you're checking your portal. So show them some love, show them that you care about this application enough to check to see whether or not a decision has been made, or if there have been other communications that come through in your portal, because that is the way that they will continue to do that. Lisa?
Yeah, and the thing I was going to add there is, remember that, let's say that you submitted your application on August 16th, the beautiful day to submit. And so you submitted on August 16th, and it's now December, January, and you haven't heard anything, and some of your friends have heard. What A&M does is they will keep going back through, sifting back through those applications to try to figure out how they're going to cull this down. Because remember, they're dealing with a lot of applications. One easy way for you to show that you're still interested is to go to that portal. Just put a reminder on your phone and go once a week and go into that portal. What that's communicating, and it's kind of, there's really, I don't know another college that does demonstrate interest like this. So I just want to say this is not typical. So you don't need to start doing this on all your colleges, but it's easy. So you could do it, is just check that portal all the time. What A&M takes that as a signal that you are genuinely interested. Okay. So that, while it's a little weird, it's definitely worth your time to do it because it can help you.
Okay. The self-reported academic record. So I just have like a few things to say about this, because it's not, it takes a little bit of work. So you just have to plan the time for entering all of your grades, essentially, because Texas A&M, and there's a lot of large public institutions that do not take your transcript because of the volume of work that creates. They ask you to sort of self-report all your grades and all your courses through a different portal. Okay, which is the SRAR website. So it's a separate website from the application itself, and then it gets submitted over to A&M. The easiest way to do it is get a copy of your transcript. You can get an unofficial copy from your counselor or from the registrar's office at your school. You should be able to sit down with that transcript next to you and in front of you and fill out the information on your grades. Some special notes: if you are a Texas resident and you're in the top 10%, they require you to both fill out the self-reported academic record and to submit a transcript to verify your rank. And if you don't, then your application is considered incomplete. So we want to make sure that you submit this self-reported academic report, because, or record, is because, like, without it, you do not have a complete application to A&M.
And remember to link it back to your application, really important. One thing that we didn't hit on that I want to hit on is the other pathways into A&M, because there's some fantastic pathways to A&M. And they change. Bob mentioned them at the beginning, but I want to just go into a little more detail, because on your application, they're going to ask you if you're open to those. And a lot of students go, no, forget it. Don't do that. Don't do that. You don't know what your options are going to be, and you don't know what you're going to feel in the spring. So I highly recommend that you consider the following. One is blend team. So blend team is, it's a co-enrollment between the university and Blinn College. We've had many students do it, and they love it because A&M has really done this right. You can live on campus, you can go to the games, you can join whatever organizations you want. It's also, you're in small classes that first year, so you usually end up with a really nice GPA. For out-of-state students, you also, the tuition is cheaper. So there's a lot of things that are an advantage to it. So that's a blend team. That's for all majors. There's also, I'm going to butcher the name, but it's basically blend team for engineers. It's ERB, I can't remember, so that's for engineers. you do want to read the fine print of these things about what kind of GPA you have to get, because it varies by program. So, and even sometimes within the program. So you do want to read the fine print and make sure you've gotten a program that will work for you. In other words, if you got an engineering, but you don't want to be an engineer, check with admissions, because there's sometimes these things can get a little wiggy. The Gateway program is a program that they had a long time ago. They've just brought it back. Gateway is basically a provisional admit, which means you come from the summer, you get your good grades, and you are in. And we have a number of kids doing that this year. So they're really great options. And so as you're filling out your application, slow down and go on and give yourself all the options on the table. I think students sometimes worry that, oh, if I say I want that, I'm not going to get in. That's not the case. So, but give yourself as many options, because there's many happy students at Texas A&M who've come in via blend team and some of these other pathways. Now there's additional pathways of like very much like the CAP program at UT, where you go to Corpus or Galveston or wherever, get your grades, and then you can come back to campus. But A&M is offering a fair amount of position of spots, if you will, unlike UT, where very few kids get offered, the program with ACC. So there's a fair amount of spots here. So I wouldn't want to shut my door to that unless there's a really specific reason that you're doing that, because it's a really great opportunity. And you never know what admissions options you're going to have in the spring. So your goal is to keep as many options open as possible. So that was just the final little thing on applications. Bob, what have we got on questions here that we want to try to address? That are specific to specific students.
Couple of questions that I'll jump on. A classic question: is 10.1% in the top 10%? The person to answer that question is the college counselor at your high school. And we always say this to families and students: now is the time to obsessively look for emails from your college counselor at your high school. Every high school does it differently, and some high schools do their process even differently year from year. So you can forget all the spam emails you want. Watch like a hawk for the emails you get from the admissions counselors at from the college counselors at your high school, and follow their process to the T.
And one thing that I would add there, and this has been true at A&M and has been true at UT with the 6%, is that students who are just right on the cusp usually do pretty well. It's not a guarantee, like the guarantee if you're definitely in, but right there on the cusp is usually, if you can't be right in the 10%, 10.1 is not the worst place to be, is what I'm saying. So, yeah.
Lisa, there's a lot of questions about what if my school doesn't offer a transcript yet in August, and what do I do in terms of handling that from a self-reported academic record standpoint?
I think Claudia gave the perfect answer. Hopefully you've kept your report cards. If you've kept your report cards, and you usually can also download those from whatever system, or it's Naviance or whatever your school uses. So you usually can get the old report cards. So you can use report cards. They're not, A&M is using the self-reported grades as a replacement for a transcript. Transcript is just the easiest way to get it all down, but you can do it if you have all 4 years of your report cards as well. So that's your other option. There's really not another option than that. Yeah, those are really your two options.
Yeah.
We have really appreciated everybody's time this afternoon. We hope you find this valuable. As we said, we'll be sending out the recording of this webinar, as well as the presentation and our guide to applying to Texas A&M University. So thanks so much, gig 'em, and have a great rest of the day and a great rest of the month. Thanks so much.